Soundstripe.
Are we veterans of this already, Griff? I mean, this is episode 4 of our weekly
inning.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This is episode 4 of the weekly podcast. Plus, things were going so bad for the Blue Jays against the Yankees a couple of weeks ago that we felt we had to do a midweek interlude. So we're vets now. We're veterans.
Pretty sad when a 3-4 road trip means they've turned it around.
Oh, God.
Although it was against the 2 first-place teams in their respective divisions, so you got that.
Yeah. Although your second opponent, the Minnesota Twins, you pretty much have the same record as them. But it feels better, Griff, because they took 2 out of 3 against the Twins, which kind of sort of maybe puts the losing 3 out of 4 to the Rays in the rear view mirror. But the number that can't be ignored for the month of May. And I know that there was some happiness interspersed, like a sweep of the Atlanta Braves and whatever. But the Jays kicked off a 4-game series at Fenway Park on May the 1st. They've played all of their divisional games this month because the Brewers are coming to town to end May. And Toronto went 2-13, lost 13 of 15 against the American League East, having played 1 series each this month against their 4 divisional opponents.
Right. And just before we go into this discussion, I just wanted to, what makes the 2 out of 3 against the Twins even better is the fact that Barrios didn't come up big, but he was the starting pitcher in a 3-0 win in the finale of that series. And that's something that nobody would have expected last year and nobody would have expected earlier. So it's something to look forward to as this team moves forward into June. But to discuss the segment, because it's nice that the first 54 games is exactly 1/3 of the schedule. And you talk about their record against the AL East and how disappointing that is for a team that expects to be a contender. But basically 5 of the top dozen teams in the American League are coming from that division. And they played 21 of the 54 games in the first third of the season against AL East opponents. And they only have 9 in the next 54. So there's 9 games against teams in the AL East until the 2/3 mark of the schedule. So that gives them an opportunity, because right now they have the second best record in the division outside the division. When the Jays come to visit in the AL East, those home teams are laughing. They say, we got these guys. They stink. But when they go somewhere else, when they're playing another opponent, they're second only to the Tampa Bay Rays. The Rays in the first third of the season, 23-8 outside the division. The Jays 22-11. So 22-11. And if you triple the first third of the season, that's only 84 wins for the Jays, which is not even close to sniffing a postseason berth. But
no,
they really have to take advantage of this second third, because, as you have pointed out, the final third of the season is not. If they haven't corrected their problems against the AL East by the final third, they're toast.
Well, the final 2 weeks are pretty much Yankees and Rays, right? And they don't see the Yankees and Rays again until the end, because you only play 2 home series, 2 road series against teams in your own division now with the realigning of the schedule. We do have to get that on a t-shirt though, Griff. The Blue Jays are second best in the division playing out of the division.
Right.
I mean, in the absence of hoisting the World Series trophy at the end of the year, the piece of metal, as the great commissioner says, that is the fallback, being second best in the division, playing outside the division.
There's a silver medal for that somewhere.
And I'm thinking of you last year writing the notes, the pregame notes for the media. That would have, if you were still doing it this year, that would have found its way in, right? The Jays are second best in the division playing outside the division.
That-
Ignore everything that happened in May in the division.
Pay no
We're
attention
good
to
when
the
we're
man
not
behind the curtains. Yeah.
Wizard of Oz. Oh,
Anyway,
man.
but
Well-
they do. I mean, there are signs that won't happen in the second third of the season. They need some turnarounds from certain key players, but it's something to look forward to if you're a Blue Jays fan looking for an optimistic side of it.
Yeah, so let's hone in on two key guys. And when we bring these names up, they're not going to be a surprise to anybody, and nor should they. But I would argue, and the two names quickly are Vladdy and Alek Manoah. Let's deal with Vladdy first. When you trade power away, and I'm not playing the hindsight game here. I was pro the offseason trades. Teoscar going to Seattle, Lourdes going to Arizona. I wondered about the Moreno part of that deal, but I figured, okay, they've seen Alejandro Kirk hit for a full season and they're bought in on this guy, whereas Moreno is an unmolded piece of clay at this point. So got to go get Dalton Varsho. That's what it's going to cost. But I was pro the trades of Teoscar and Lourdes. But when you're bringing Dalton Varsho back, who's an excellent defender and a guy who's essentially a splits guy, right? A left-handed hitter who hits righties well, whether that's happened or not this year, that's his history. Doesn't hit lefties so well. And you're bringing in the Kiermaiers, and he's been better than expected, I would argue. But you're bringing in those types of the world, Griff. You are anticipating that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to be a key power cog in your lineup. And Vladdy has 8 home runs so far this year, 7 of them against big league pitching. I'm that one in Tampa Bay in the 20-1 win off of Rayleigh or whoever the hell it was. And that's a position player, but good. I get it. It counts. He has 7 home runs against pitchers this year, hasn't hit a home run at home. The question now is what is Vladdy in terms of being a power hitter? Is the 48 home runs he hit in 2021 an outlier and he's more of a 25 to 30 home run guy? Or is he somebody who can be counted on for 40 plus in years ahead going forward? Because it doesn't just affect how you construct your lineup. It also affects how much money and how much term you're probably willing to commit to the guy.
2 points here. One of them is with regard to the trade to the Diamondbacks. You know, it takes 2 to make a deal. And my feeling is that Alejandro Kirk was not part of the Arizona demand ever, that they wanted Gabby Moreno. Right. And they got Lourdes. And if the Jays wanted to trade Lourdes and they wanted to bring Varsho in, it wasn't a matter of they gave up the wrong guy. It's that Arizona asked for the right guy. And the Jays thought it was enough that they needed to change the outfield defense and make it better, which they have. But, you know, I don't think we can discuss that the Jays gave up the wrong catcher because maybe nobody was asking for Alejandro Kirk.
And maybe we're finding out why.
And then the other item is, before we even get into a deeper discussion with Vlad, is that I was in the dugout for a Peacock game or one of those stupid YouTube or whatever games last year in Kansas City. And Vlad was in a slump. He was like 0 for 13, 0 for 15. And he popped up in the 3rd inning. And I was there to set up an interview with the manager, with Charlie at that point. And he came off the field and he was sulking and he slammed his helmet down and he was just looked like he was going to cry. And the Barrio, the guys at the end of the dugout, grabbed him, brought him down to the end of the dugout, sort of moved me aside because that's where I was standing, held him against the back dugout wall and started lecturing him and giving him hell about his attitude and about the fact that he's a better player than that and it's going to turn around. Now there's no Barrio anymore. who is that person? Who is that guy? And we're seeing Vlad have to make adjustments and maybe become a man on his own. And it's something that wasn't taken into consideration. You know, everybody said the culture of the barrio is like too playful and is too lighthearted, and let's get down and find some real baseball players who like to play ball the right way. Well, maybe.
Oh, I didn't. No, that's not my take on it.
No, I'm not saying your
Yeah.
take. No,
Okay.
definitely not saying your take, but I'm saying that this is my reaction to what has happened with Vlad, and that he'll never snap out of it and send him to the minors, whatever. I don't think that it's as simple as that. I'm not accusing you. I would
No.
never
I know.
accuse
I
you of
just,
anything,
but
Scott.
when all that gets lumped into one big messy bowl of piss soup. Like, my view on it was, you needed better outfield defense, and you needed, excuse me as I clear my throat, you needed better attention to detail, which
Yeah, that was
really
that
has.
was a mantra coming out of spring training. And what happened to the detail? That was like a month of having Chapman hit 1,000 OPS and Bo do Bo's thing. And then all of a sudden it became, wow, look at our attention to detail. I think it was more attention to two guys carrying the offense and Vlad performing like Vlad. And then now all of a sudden, every non-attention to detail is showing up as a game-changing factor. And
Well, they're
there
trying
have
to
been a
do
lot of
too
them.
much. Griff, they're trying to do too much. And, you know, I was oot and a boot on Sunday afternoon, and we'll timestamp this as we always like to do. And I'm looking down if you're watching on YouTube, because I can never remember anything anymore. It's actually reaching crisis levels. So yes, it is Monday, May the 29th, late in the morning Eastern time when we're doing this. Sunday's game. I'm oot and a boot listening to Ben Wagner on the radio, and George Springer leads the game off with a dunker into center field. And Bo Bichette, who you could argue is the best hitter in baseball right now, or one of the hottest hitters in baseball, is up, and George Springer gets himself thrown out trying to steal. And I'm like, you know, Bo's a guy who can gap it. Bo's a guy who hits the ball from first base line to third base line. This a guy who can find extra bases just by shooting one past the first baseman. Like, you cannot be running into outs in the top of the first inning. If you're on first with 2 outs and you're looking to steal a base to get into scoring position to score on a 2-out hit to the outfield, I get it. But like, what the hell are you doing? What the hell are you doing? You can't get thrown. You cannot risk the result of being thrown out. And then, of course, Bo gets a hit. Matt Chapman unnecessarily thrown out at third base later in that game. I mean, the Blue Jays won, and here we are picking apart the Sunday game. But is this attention to detail, or is this an offense that's scuffling and guys are so deep into their heads, and the collective so deep into their heads now, that they're trying to do too much and therefore making bad decisions? And the 2 names I referenced from Sunday's game, Springer and Chapman, weren't born yesterday. Like, they've been playing big league baseball for a while now. Even the vets are pressing.
Yeah, I would agree with you on the vets are pressing. I would agree with you on the fact that it's not just the kids that are making mistakes. Look at Brandon Belt. He watches a ball hit the right field fence in Minneapolis, and then he gets thrown out at second base. I mean, it's something Bo did earlier in the month. But with Bo, you go, oh, yeah, he's a kid. But Brandon Belt is brought in specifically to show what it's like to be on a championship team with his 2 World Series rings and whatever. But I have to disagree with you on the George Springer stealing second or being caught stealing of second. Because if you're trying to establish yourself as an aggressive offensive team, yeah, Bo is hot. Vlad is not. Belt, I think, might have been whenever batting fourth. But you got to establish yourself as an offense that's going to be aggressive on the bases. And if they thought that Springer could steal second base, then that little dunker that Bo hits is going to score a run. Or if he's out at second base, which he was, then you still have an offense that can create runs with 1 out. You got Bo and the top of the order, which has been dynamic at times. So I don't think you can, in hindsight, say, "Oh, he was thrown out, so it was a bad play." They have enough bad plays offensively and over aggressive base running and stupid plays that you don't have to point at that one. Which I
Okay, but
disagree.
I'm not hindsighting, Griff, because I was yelling words. If anybody was passing me on the highway yesterday and saw a middle-aged man appear to be yelling to nobody else in the car,
You
that
were
was me. That was
I was
me.
jammed with Broken Heroes on a Last Chance Power Drive, and that
And
was
I mean,
you.
here we are grousing about a game that they won, but just
Yeah.
but
There's
the
plenty of
general,
other games.
no, yeah, just the general concept of they're pressing, and you got to hope they get this thing turned around. And Vladdy's got to start hitting more home runs than he has been, man. I know it's easier said than done, but this offense is built around the notion that Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. are going to do a lot of damage. And Bo has not just lived up to his end of the bargain, he has more than lived up to the end of his share of the bargain. And I mean, this is a guy who I was tweeting about in the first half of last year, saying, how much longer is this guy going to hit in the 2 spot? Because he had an OBP south of 3 until he got really hot in the second half of the season. I didn't give up on Bo Bichette as a ball player. I just said, I think his spot in the lineup might be a little too high up for what he's given them right now. Well, he is more than full value for his spot in the lineup now. And if a guy like Vladdy can hell, just get somebody else hot, somebody else behind Bo Bichette getting hot and making this a lengthier lineup. Like Alejandro Kirk, everybody forgets Alejandro Kirk was horseshit offensively last April in 2022, but found it in May and carried it through most of the rest of the season. He did cool off toward the end of the year, but for most of the rest of the season, he was elite. We're 2 months into this season, and he hasn't found it yet. And I don't know what the date is when the conversation of he showed up to spring training late for the birth of his child stops. I mean, I don't know when he got started late. So okay. We're 2 months into the regular season now. Danny Jansen, the poor guy, man, he's so important to this team. Danny Jansen's hurt again. They're getting nothing from second base. The third baseman is struggling after a red hot start.
All right. Here's a couple of things for
On
you.
and on I'm going.
Yeah. In terms of the help that's required. You look at April, and Bo was hot. Bo's been hot in April and May. But you look at Chapman and Vlad in April, and you need 3 guys. You can't just have 2 guys to carry an offense. You need 3 guys or more. And the Jays in May were down to basically 1 guy with some contributions, maybe from Kiermaier at the bottom of the order, but that's not going to do it. I did some bench stats through the first 54 games of the season through the first third of the season. And if you don't count the backup catcher as a bench guy, because it's a requirement that you have 2 catchers, the rest of the bench, other than Jansen and Kirk, is 31 for 171, a 181 average, 5 homers and 14 RBIs in 54 games. And that's everybody on that bench. So when you're saying, well, maybe they should have hit for so-and-so, well, what are you going to hit with? Who are you going to hit with? And there's so much missing to make this Jays team a serious contender in the last 108 games of the season, that they better find it bit by bit. But they can't go on playing like they did in the first 54.
Right. When Ernie Clement is pinch hitting for Dalton Varsho late in the game, I mean, you'd look at that and say, well, Dalton Varsho's a left-handed hitter who's never at the big league level really been very good against left-handed pitchers. So pinch hitting for him makes total sense. But then Blue Jays fans on the flip side of the script are saying, but who's Ernie Clement? Right.
The other thing there, Scotty, is that John Schneider is struggling to keep that clubhouse behind John Schneider as a manager, and the second trip to the mound debacle with Alek Manoah didn't help. Probably started it off, and I think that some of the veteran players might look at the pinch hitting for Dalton Varsho and go, "Hey, what the hell is this manager doing?" You know,
Okay,
like
and
you're
that's
bringing
fine.
Ernie Clement in, who's been there for 2 days, and we got a guy that we brought in for Lourdes and Gabby Moreno, and he can't hit in that spot.
Okay, that's fine. They can. Here I am, raising my hand. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing it. I'm describing it for you. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you're on the right page. Our apologies for that one. I'm going to come to John Schneider's defense here. John Schneider isn't responsible for the lack of depth at the higher minor league levels, either with position players or pitchers. People say, and we'll get to Alek Manoah here shortly, people say, we'll send Alek Manoah down and let him find himself the way Roy Halladay did back in 2001. Okay, I know there's stuff you want to say on that, Griff, but who's coming up? Thomas Hatch? Drew Hutchison? Who do you want pitching every fifth day for the Toronto Blue Jays while Alek Manoah, quote, finds himself? No, seriously, like, you have to have an answer to that question in order to just legitimately rant, rave, and scream about the challenges Manoah is having. Circling back to my original point, players can feel whatever way they want about John Schneider, and perhaps he's pointed his own rifle at his foot once or twice and shot. But in this case, John Schneider is not responsible for the lack of depth. And one of the things John Schneider is responsible for is managing the personalities in the clubhouse, keeping that coalesced and congealed, while also managing that front office and that general manager. And Ross Atkins has left this team woefully short on depth. And when guys struggle at the big league level, somewhat unexpectedly, and Alek Manoah would be a focal point on the pitching side, and there are a couple of guys we can look at on I mean, they don't have anybody playing second base this year except when they let Whit Merrifield stand there. You know, they've got guys who are perhaps unexpectedly struggling. Perhaps this is who Santiago Espinal is, or he's somewhere in between the first half of last year and who he is now. That'll all come out in the wash. But they are woefully lacking in depth at so many spots. It feels like oversight. So to me, this is a step above the manager.
I think that John Schneider is a perfectly good major league manager. I mean, we talked about it last week. I think you look at Joe Torre going to the Yankees, and he had not only depth on the bench, but he had a great starting lineup. And the headline that greeted him when he was signed was "Clueless Joe" in the New York Post.
That was the Post, right?
Yeah. Because his record was like 170 games under 500 as a major league manager. And there's a difference there between John Schneider in terms of experience. But that 170 games under 500 for Joe Torre might have warranted Clueless Joe. Like, what are they bringing this guy in? He's never done anything. Well, John Schneider's experience as a manager has been at the minor leagues, where you're not assaulted every day by numbers and analytics and readouts and who should be playing and who should be pitching and what 3-batter window is Tim Meza going to be inserted in, and will a window come down on his hands, and like that sort of thing never happened in the minor leagues at New Hampshire and below Lansing, where he formed relationships with guys like Vlad and Bo and Danny Jansen and players that are playing for him now. So that's important. But what he's coming to grips with and adjusting to is what you're talking about, the front office, being in his office after games, before games, giving him information the night before and saying, this is who should be in your lineup. And that's something that he and his staff are going to have to come to grips with, because John Schneider has been on this coaching staff for a while, but the coaching room is across the hall from the manager's office, and he never saw what happened with Charlie Montoya or with whoever was there before him, John Gibbons, those guys. With the amount of information that they were besieged by, and how does John Schneider now process that information, or does he just go straight with it and be a pawn of the front office? That's the compromise that he has to come to grips with if he's going to be a successful big league manager.
You know, I always felt when the years I covered the Jays, and obviously you were around, I always felt that Colby Rasmus, who had as beautiful a left-handed swing as anybody you'd see, like almost Olerud level, and had a gift for the game, but he was tortured by it, and it was because of his upbringing. And I always felt that Colby Rasmus never reached his full potential because he played the game every day anticipating the phone call from dad. Why'd you F this up? Why'd you screw this up? What happened on this play? Come on, you dim-witted shit, get it together, blah, 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 blah. And I watched John Schneider manage the bullpen sometimes, and I'm honing in on the bullpen because that's always the thing that people say. Well, the manager can only do so much, but the one thing that he can do is manage the bullpen. Sometimes I watch John Schneider and I feel like he is running the ship, and probably agrees with a lot of the moves, but running the ship in anticipation of being able to answer the questions that are asked of him by the general manager or the AGM or whoever the hell is in his office after a game, as opposed to just sort of being free flowing and, you know, and well, no, I'm just throwing names out here now,
Yeah.
but Trevor Richards is looking really good today. I think he can get this guy out. Well, no, but we got to go to Mesa now, because if we don't go to Mesa now, we're never going to go to Mesa in this game. And he's warmed up once, so, you know, we got to be real careful. So we got to go to Mesa now, even though Richards' changeup looks so good today. I know he could get this guy, but we have to make the change. Like, there's no, I think data and analytics and metrics and all of that stuff is hugely important and needs to factor into your decisions. But if if the people above you are breaking you down day in and day out and making you answer for even something that may be instinctual, you're going to go, your creativity, your instincts, it's all going to close off and shut down. And now you're just a robot.
A blessing and a curse for John Schneider is that he's been in the dugout as a coach, observing for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And he was able to see, like, Charlie Montoya did not like Trevor Richards pitching more or sitting down and then getting back up and coming back in the game. And yet the analytics people said that he was the guy in that bullpen that he should use in that role. And for a while, in that situation where he would sit and then come back out, Trevor Richards under Charlie Montoya had an ERA over 10 in that second inning when he stood back up. But yet Trevor Richards this year, with John Schneider rolling with the advice and the analytics, is probably the best Blue Jays pitcher in that situation where he finishes off an inning and then comes back out again. And so, like, Schneider was able to witness the sort of rebel behavior of Charlie Montoya in certain situations, disagreeing with the numbers and the analytics. And he was able to sort of process that as to how he was going to handle it. And his decision so far seems to have been that I'll go with the flow. Like Tim Mesa's window of 3 batters that he can get out successfully is this. So when those guys are coming up, even if it's, I think the starter might go another 2 batters, that's Mesa's guy. We got to bring him in because he's got to pitch to 3 guys. And I think that just the new rules and there's sort of things that old time managers never had to deal with that these guys do, including all the analytic stuff that comes across their desk. And, you know, maybe Schneider will figure it out, but right now he's struggling. Part
of what we love to do here on Exit Philosophy is tell old stories, and you've got more than a handful of them. So we got to get the thought in on Manoah, because we talked about him a lot, but you have a message, Griff, for the people who are saying Roy Halladay, Alek Manoah, send him down to the minor leagues, let him rebuild himself. And first of all, the two situations are not at all comparable because Alek Manoah had a year last year in which he finished top 3 in the American League Cy Young voting. Roy Halladay did not have that in his past when he was sent down in 2001, although as a pretty much overhead pitcher in 1998 as a kid, he came up and almost no-hit the Detroit Tigers late in the 98 season. And when he won his Cy Young awards and dominated for the Blue Jays and later the Phillies, he looked like a completely different pitcher. These two situations are not the same, but people are comparing them. And my response is, who you calling up if you're sending Manoah out? You take it a step further.
I think that most fans are of the thinking that the only time a pitcher's working is the day they see him toe the rubber for his start. And Alek Manoah does that once every 5 days. Then you build in off days. It might be once every 6 days. But in those in-between days, he's working. He's working in the clubhouse. He's working with video. He's working with the pitching coach. He's working with the trainers and the athletic, the high performance people. And so the suggestion to send him down to Buffalo to work with the tier 2 group, fewer pitching coaches that aren't in the majors because the best pitching coach is in the majors, equipment and training facilities that are clearly superior at the major league level. Now you're suggesting send them down as what? Punishment? And your point of who's going to come up, if there was somebody knocking at the door ready to go, then that might be a consideration. But if you're just going to send Alek Manoah down because he hasn't been performing at the major league level, you're forgetting about the 4 days in between starts where he's trying to find himself, trying to get back. They talk about pitching being 70% mental, 30% physical. His mental 70% is not where it should be, where it was last year, where he wants it to be. But he's not going to find that sitting in a clubhouse in Buffalo. He's going to find that at some point this season, get back out there, have 2 or 3 good starts in a row and say, hey, I'm Alek Manoah. This is what I got to do. I have to be more attentive to detail. I have to be ready to get back out there instead of maybe leaning on the rail and cheering his home run teammates as they cross the plate. Maybe it's just something as simple as that, where he has to find a niche, find a routine that gets him back to where he was. But sending him to Buffalo, sending him to AAA, sending him down to Dunedin to work out is not the solution.
So his autobiography in 20 years will not be titled, I Found Myself on a Bus to Rochester?
No, not at all. I don't think that would be anybody's autobiography title.
Oh, poor Crapchester. And what a horrible nickname for it too, but there we are. Some anniversaries that have either just happened or are coming up. We'll look ahead shortly to SkyDome's 34th anniversary, the wild opening night party that was emceed by Alan Thicke. The 34th anniversary of that is June 3rd. The 34th anniversary of the first Blue Jays game is June 5th, which was played against the Milwaukee Brewers, who were an American League East opponent at the time. If you're like 40 or younger, you may not remember that. But the Brewers were an American League East team way back in the day. We just passed, Griff, on May the 25th, the 34th anniversary of the Montreal Expos. And of course, you were working for the Expos at the time, making a massive and relatively early season trade. Like we always hear, well, nobody's making blockbuster deals in May. What are you talking about? The Montreal Expos getting Mark Langston, May the 25th, 1989, to be the ace or co-ace of their rotation, and an epic deal with the Seattle Mariners. And as we know, a future Hall of Famer went the other way in that trade.
Yeah, there was it was a trade that was in the works as we flew from Montreal to San Diego to begin a West Coast swing. And every year there were 2 West Coast swings, always began in San Diego, LA, worked your way up the coast to San Francisco. And so the trade was in the works. We were in the air, and I was told that, because of the 3-hour time difference, don't let the writers get away, because and there were no cell phones in those days. So the only thing I could think of was to invite them to the bar and to buy them a lot of beers and stuff.
What a crazy idea coming from
that
you.
worked. So
Totally out of left field.
Eventually, the news of the trade came in, and everybody knew Randy Johnson's arm was dynamic, and not. I don't think everyone was convinced of his potential to ever reach like 3 seasons in the bigs, much less the Hall of Fame, because his walk totals were higher than his innings pitched every year. Brian Holman was a kid who had already been in the major leagues and looked like a workman-like middle rotation starter. And that's what he basically turned out to be. And then Gene Harris was a defensive back from Tulane University who's decided that he liked pitching, was drafted, signed, and there was great potential, great expectation of him being a major league middle reliever or even a closer. But Randy Johnson was the guy that caused the most argument and controversy of whether this guy was ever going to pitch. There was one front office executive with the Expos who had recommended that Randy Johnson be released the winter before because he was never going to make it. He just didn't have what it took. I mean, he wasn't the brightest tool in the shed. There was one time in spring training where Randy Johnson bet a teammate bet Randy Johnson, put it that way, because that there was a fire ant hill coming in from the center field diamond that we rented from the Braves, and a big fire ant hill. And a teammate said, "Hey, Unit, I bet you wouldn't put your hand in that fire ant hill." And Johnson, I don't even know how much they were betting, but he said, "Yeah." And so he put his hand in a fire ant hill, but to prove that he wasn't the brightest tool, brightest bulb he put his left hand in, his pitching hand, instead of his right hand. He put his left hand in and was out for a week at spring training. So yeah, he wasn't expected to be a Hall of Famer, but he certainly developed as such. And the Mark Langston trade looked like it was working out for the Expos. The first day that he pitched, he came in and he struck out 12 Padres, like 2 days after the trade, struck out 12 Padres, but then asked if he could go home to take care of some business. So he flew away from the team for, I guess, until the day before his next start. And then 2 days later, Dennis Martinez, who had been the ace before Langston arrived, pitched against the Dodgers at Dodger Stadium. And then he decided that if Mark Langston could go home, I can go home. So he asked the manager if he could leave to take care of some business at home in Miami. I'm sure he didn't have any business to take care of, but if Langston could do it, Dennis could do it. And the relationship with his teammates really never got any better for Langston in his short tenure before he became a free agent at the end of the '89 season.
I'm still stuck on the fire ant hills.
Yeah.
The fire ants. So he just got chewed up by a bunch of fire ants. Not the highest. Wager. He pocketed $100. Now that, of course, is probably before he made his. Well, not probably. It's before he made his $250 million as a future Hall of Fame pitcher.
And they had given Randy Johnson every opportunity, because Joe Kerrigan, who ended up being the major league pitching coach under Felipe Alou, Joe Kerrigan followed Randy Johnson at every level. He was his personal pitching coach. He was a pitching coach for the team at every level, but his special assignment was Randy Johnson. Let's see if we can make this guy a major league pitcher, because he was throwing 100 when nobody threw 100. And the only problem was he didn't know where it was going. And but
I remember some of those early '90s Mariners teams would come in, and there was one start Randy had where he couldn't find the strike zone. The Jays just stood there and walked around the bases.
Yeah, he was Randy Johnson was a USC product, and Bill Lee was a USC product. So when I don't think anybody can do game notes like this anymore. When Randy Johnson made his debut at 6'10", I said that in the game notes, I said Randy Johnson is the tallest left-hander to start for the Expos out of USC, but not the highest. And I said that honor belongs to Bill Lee. I don't think game notes go along those lines anymore.
And based on the Fire Ants story, both were from outer space.
Correct.
Right?
That's a good topper for this story.
Yeah, both were from outer space. And so the 34th anniversary of, people know it now as Rogers Center, it'll always be SkyDome to me, is the party was June the 3rd, the launch, and that grand stage, and it was a major show, and they peeled the roof back to show off how it could retract, and then of course it poured rain. The late Alan Thicke, who was the star of Growing Pains, who would later go on to be known as Robin Thicke's father, but at the time he was the star of Growing Pains, which was a huge sitcom in the 1980s and all that. So Canadian star, he emceed it. And then 2 nights later, Fred McGriff hit the first home run in SkyDome history, I think in the bottom of the 2nd inning. Future Blue Jay Paul Molitor had the first hit in the top of the 1st for the Milwaukee Brewers. Brewers went on to win that game. Jimmy Key and Griff, I want to say it was Bill Wagman, who started for the Brew Crew. This is top of the head stuff. I should have written it all down. I know Key started for the Blue Jays. But anyway, coming up on 34 years of the SkyDome, and my father worked there. He was in the SkyDome front office, was the CFO at the time. So I was at that first game. I was at that party 2 nights prior. I was a 9-year-old, almost 10-year-old kid at the time. I have amazing memories. And really, obviously, that period of time helped to shape my love for baseball. I can't believe the stadium's that old. It doesn't feel that long ago.
That brings up the rivalry between Montreal and Toronto. And just, you're telling a story about the SkyDome and the roof being retracted and being the first retractable roof stadium in Canada, maybe North America, I'm not sure. But in Montreal, we were looking very carefully at this situation, and had just put the new roof up, the Kevlar roof up on and it was not ready for game action. But we did decide, and by we, I'm not sure who, because they didn't ask me, but we did decide to retract it the night before the Blue Jays opened SkyDome, so that we could say that technically we were the first to have a retractable stadium. But as you pointed out earlier, it could only do that once, because
if the roof doesn't shut after you've opened it, is it really retractable?
Because when you think about it, that Olympic Stadium was put up for the 76 Olympics. The Expos started to play there in 77. For the Olympics, you can't have a closed stadium for all the major track and field events and for the opening and closing ceremonies. So it didn't have a roof at the time. The tower was going up. But the roof itself, the Kevlar roof, was stored in a warehouse in Marseille on the Mediterranean waterfront. And
Just to say,
when so 1989 was 12 years after the stadium opened for baseball, and they finally opened they went into the warehouse, got the roof out, and there were holes in it. And we're assuming that the holes were created by Marseille rats that were nibbling away at the roof when it was in storage. And we believe that there's a whole generation of bulletproof rats wandering around Marseille full of Kevlar. So, that would be a great premise for a new horror movie. The Olympic Stadium produced rats.
Yeah. Just
took over the world.
Could follow up the Winnie the Pooh heel turn in that sea-level slasher flick from earlier this year.
But by the time they repaired the roof and got it over and got it into the stadium, which, by the way, was Roger Taillibert, the guy who designed the stadium, made the parking lot so that the parking slots were built for Citroën and Fiats. And no North American car could fit in there and open their front doors. So it was not the greatest investment in the world. Has been around. They just shut it down. But the Kevlar roof story is one that, no matter how often SkyDome says they were the first to have a retractable roof, that was Olympic Stadium. Thank you.
No, you unzipped the roof there
yeah.
and couldn't get it back on. That doesn't make it retractable.
I suppose.
So you're telling me the Ford Mercury Marquise couldn't slide into one of those parking spots even if you backed it in?
You might have
big boats.
You might have to get out of the sunroof, but it might fit.
34th anniversary of SkyDome coming up. It's crazy. And we talked about this last week, but you and I have both been to the stadium now to see a game or two this year, and the Renos are off to a great start, and I know they're going to finish them off next off season. But the stadium is looking great. Sat 3 weeks shy of literally 3 weeks shy, because my birthday is June 26th. So 3 weeks shy, June 5th of my 10th birthday, sat up in the 500s behind home plate with my cousin, my aunt, a few others we had family all over because my dad was very good to us and able to get us tickets to the big game. So I have amazing memories of that. And just the excitement around the city at the time. And this was when the CN Tower and the SkyDome and maybe the Royal York Hotel, that was the city's skyline, and one or two skyscrapers. Now you can't see the Rogers Center from 3 blocks away, right? So much has changed.
I thought when I came in 92, 93, it was for the World Series as a PR assistant for Major League Baseball. When you made that turn coming from the airport to downtown and you saw the tower and the stadium, that was an awesome sight and a real signature for the city. And then I was really saddened when they started building all those condo structures, and you'd make that same turn and not be able to identify the tower or the stadium. And it sort of changed, to me, the dynamic of what downtown Toronto should look like.
As we put a wrap on this, just a couple of things. A shout out to Liam Hendriks, who is in remission following treatment for non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and he's returning to the Chicago White Sox. Liam, we covered him, Griff, with the 2014 Blue Jays, and then he ended up getting traded to Kansas City and was part of that Royals team that actually went on to lose the World Series to the San Francisco Giants. Came back in 2015, hadn't established himself yet as a high leverage elite reliever when he was in Toronto, but was always a class dude, and obviously got shipped to Oakland, I think, for Jesse Chavez, right? Which sounds like a stupid trade now, but really wasn't at the time. But Liam's turned himself into a great pitcher, and the fact that he's healthy, the fact that he's well, good guy, good sense of humor, married a Canadian girl. She's a Habs fan, so nobody's perfect. But just great to know that he's healthy and know that he's back out there.
Yeah, definitely. And he's being activated by the White Sox on Monday for a series against the Angels. And, the fact that he's not going to a minor league rehab probably means he won't assume the closer's role right away. But just seeing him get back on the mound for the first time will be an emotional moment. I mean, you think about John Lester, Andres Galarraga, Mario Lemieux, and the golfer Paul Azinger. They all bounced back from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it's not an exceptional comeback, but it's one that everybody is cheering for him to be successful and continue his career, which, as you pointed out, has really evolved into being one of the top relievers in Major League Baseball.
And quickly as well, some love. I mean, this is less than the least we can do. But you know me, I rep the brand, East Coast lifestyle. Just some love and some hope and prayers for the great people of Nova Scotia right now who are experiencing some wildfires. Uncle Shawnee Griff, who you talked to many times, my old producer of the Scott MacArthur show, Sean Levine, who lives in Hammonds Plains now, which is a suburb, if you will, of Halifax Northwest. He's in the fire zone and he's actually been evacuated from his condo. So like it's personal for me, for us. We know somebody who's in the middle of this. The people of Nova Scotia are awesome, wonderful, and our thoughts are with the people of that great province as they deal with these wildfires. And let's hope they get put out as soon as is humanly possible.
Great thought, Scotty.
So we'll put a wrap on episode 4 of Exit Philosophy. We're available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it. And you can get us on the YouTube page as well, youtube.com/Exit Philosophy. And Griff and I are closing in on making an announcement about some additional features that we are going to bring to our YouTube page. So be on the lookout for that. Until next Monday, or if there's a crisis, maybe until later this week. Who knows? We're kicking around.
Who knows when something's going to go to extra innings, and that's what our extra moments are. But yeah, thanks, Scotty, for guiding us through this week 4 episode, and I look forward to it.
And thank you for jumping in, because I had jumbled that sentence so badly that there was no clean out for me. So you, Griff, gave me the shot at recovery. We will talk to you at the very latest next Monday on Exit Philosophy.